proposals, zoning proposals for the town meeting. We're going to deal with 3 of them tonight, and these 3 are going to be handled by a referendum, correct? Which means you'll be voting in the booths when you vote for selectmen. The selectmen have been, or code enforcement has been approached by homeowners in the past, property owners, who have wanted to, who've owned a piece of land for a while, paid taxes, wanted to build on it now, or add an accessory building or a garage to their present property, and found out that part of their land now is in resource protection, which means that they can't do anything on it. So a number of people approached code enforcement about this over time. The selectmen asked us last year to see if we couldn't find some way of maybe cleaning this up a little bit. We took longer than they wanted, and they came up with a plan this fall, I guess. We finally got one finished this fall, and they're pretty much the same, except that they take out one of the definitions that the town has right now for resource protection. And that is any wetland 2 acres or more outside of the shoreland district that meets a few criteria as far as hydric soils, water, things like this. They took that out. The only resource protection that the selectmen want to deal with now is resource protection within the shoreland zone, which is 250 feet back from the edge of a great pond or a river. All right? So all the verbiage you see, and you've all got a copy of this, I trust, correct? Yes,
Doesn't
good.
sound right to me.
All the verbiage is basically just, they change the definition, they make the definition of resource protection a little bit looser than we did. So, and that's pretty much what the difference is right now. Are there any questions?
So what are you?
You want to come up to the podium, you'll have to come up and state your name, smile pretty for the camera, and ask away.
Ron Valancourt, I live on Goose Pond Road. So am I to assume that what was considered wetlands on this map, that isn't on that map now, that those are no longer considered wetlands?
Nope. These 2 maps right now.
This is the one that's pertinent tonight. This is the one that shows the
No problem.
the small wetlands, right here.
Okay, this is the one that has the wetlands taken out that were outside of,
No, it just shows the existing status of things.
have you got the map that would show
Yep.
what the selectmen's?
The brown areas, right, is what we're talking about. All the brown areas will no longer be in resource protection, but they will still be wetlands if they're wetlands. It's not going to change wetland, it's just going to change the zoning as resource protection.
Right.
No, we're not gonna drain them, we're just gonna change the regulations that they're...
So anything that's brown here on the map,
Well, the reason I'm asking is because on this map, my property is in one of the gray areas. It's identified as to be removed, and it's not on that map, so I don't know if I even should be worried about it.
oh, you don't have to worry about anything.
Is that on tape? Thanks.
Well, I honestly don't know what that map over there, because I can't read it. I don't know exactly what that means.
That's the aquifer
That's the
protection district.
proposed, that's the proposed where you're removing the selectmen are proposing to removing the wetlands 2 to 10 acres outside of the shoreline. That's Article 1.
Okay, so that's where they're already taken out. It's the same as this, except this still has them in.
They're black on that one. The ones identified black, same as this one right here, which was Mr. Valancourt's area, it would be removed off of his property.
If
Article 1.
If the selectmen's definition prevails, then the black areas would be removed, correct?
Correct.
Okay, there you go. Wait a second. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And you are?
For the record, my name's Dan Weeks, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak and try to understand this proposal. I traveled over 300 miles to be here, so it matters to me a lot. We've owned a camp lot on Great East Lake since the 1930s. My grandfather, my father, now me. We pay taxes for 70 years, but right now I don't have a camp lot under the current resource protection. I can't build on it. I'm zoned out of existence unless you exempt the few of us in this situation. I've watched it happen over the years. Zoning gets more and more restrictive, and I mistakenly had faith that the town would exempt those of us that predated all zoning. It seems you've exempted non-conforming structures. You've even allowed their expansion by right, but the property owner who didn't build, didn't throw up a camp or a shack in the 60s, is too late and out of luck. My family's been good taxpayers, we've been good stewards of the land, and I feel we shouldn't have its value taken away. I can comply with a 75-foot setback in my case. I can't comply with a 250-foot or more setback, which is what exists now, to the best of my understanding. So I'm asking you to please vote on the selectmen's version of this revision. No other. That's the only one that I think will help in my case. I don't want to be left with a valueless lot after all these years. Thanks.
All right, the selectmen's version only deals with RP, resource protection land, which would require a conditional use permit from the planning board if you wanted to add or build within 250 feet of a great pond or river. Outside of that is where we have our present zoning for RP, and the planning board's proposing that outside of the 250 feet, if you're in RP, you could come to the planning board and request a conditional use permit to,
Can I just tell you what applies? What applies, seems to apply to me, if I understand it correctly. All proposed buildings, sewage disposal systems, and other improvements are located outside of 75 feet horizontal distance of a stream or upland edge of a wetland. What I'm facing is more wetland than open shoreline. So my understanding is that with this revision, I'll go back to what amounts to more like the shore zone restrictions in 2006. You're turning back the clock a little bit.
right,
For those of us who pre-exist all of this.
May I ask Mr. Weeks a question, please?
yeah, sure.
Mr. Weeks, you had just stated that you're next to you're in a 250-foot buffer area, so that, if I'm understanding you correctly, the wetland that you're next to is larger than 10 acres, is that correct?
It's certainly not a state wetland,
Well,
and
would have to be. Could you show us maybe where it is on the map?
It's right there, Tom.
Have you got it up here?
Yeah.
it's the triangular piece that since 2007, I'm not quite sure when it happened because I am a distant landowner.
This
How many-
little
The
triangle right
Resource
here?
Protection District was expanded.
What's the
and
size
I
of
was no
the,
longer left with, no longer had a buildable area,
what's the size of the lot, Mr. Weeks?
3.2 acres. And approximately, I've been out there, I can meet the 75-foot setback from the upland edge of wetland easily. I couldn't meet a 250 foot.
almost think it's the squares.
Well, if it's within the shoreland zone, do you know, Ken, can you tell if that's within the shoreland zone?
I would assume so. It could actually even be Great East Lake,
Well, that's what I was
where
thinking.
lake turns to stream, so it could be further back in there. The whole lot is resource protection or shoreland zone.
Well,
I'm not asking to be exempt from shoreland zone.
no, you couldn't be anyway. And the selectmen don't change that. If it's within 250 feet of the lake, it still would be RP, and you still can't do anything on it. If it's further away than 250 feet from the lake,
Very difficult to say exactly where the lake begins and
well, that's
the
why,
wetland begins and the stream begins. In this case, I would honestly say, all right, I'm well away. You can see the shoreland zone ends, or they basically ended one of the shoreland zones at my property because the lake ends there.
right. This would, you'd have to talk to code enforcement, and you guys would have to go out and walk the land and see exactly where it falls. And if that doesn't work, then someone might have to get out there and map it.
You know,
I don't know, if it's within 250 feet of the water,
Can you show
I don't
that?
know that any of this is gonna help you.
Thank you.
I'm confident that, that it can. And that would be the selectmen's version.
Well, there you go, then you're all set. Although, well,
I wish, you know, I
Wish
wish
you
we
lived
could be
in
more
town.
specific. I guess I'm in an area that's also very gray, which is unfortunate. Like to leave here with something I can count on.
I can't tell you because I don't exactly know where your land lies and what it looks like. So, and I don't know anybody here that can give you any kind of a definitive answer right now.
And the maps are, we know they're not definitive, they're not accurate enough.
Well,
for
yeah,
planning
they
purposes.
can't be, I mean,
Yeah.
they're too small.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry. Who's up? Who's next?
Times, we just want to try to delineate something for Mr. Weeks and the rest of us, so we understand this a little better. Is that a 250-foot buffer
Yeah,
around the whole thing?
yep.
So that's state regulated, that's nothing that the town implemented in 2011?
I don't believe so, no.
That was in place when zoning started?
And is that 250 foot from open water? Is that how you define the?
From the edge
lake?
of the lake,
Eh,
The high water mark.
yeah.
I think I can meet that too. Because my wetland,
Doesn't mean that.
you know, is at probably close to 200 feet deep. Not, you know, the open water is a long way, is a trickle in the middle of what used to be called a meadow.
Yeah, there's nothing we could decide for you tonight, and someone's gonna have to go out there and really look at it, and then measure it off to find out exactly how much is in, how much is out, where the 250 edge would be.
I'm nowhere unless that brown resource protection goes away. And that is, I think, what you're doing.
That's shoreline zone right there. The brown is shoreline zone.
That we're not changing.
Right. You can build it in the shoreline zone, right, within that 250
You
feet
can, yeah, as long as you're 100 feet back.
from the water.
Yep.
Right, so you can build 100 feet from the water,
But you need that buildable lot size as well.
right, as long as you meet the requirements of a buildable lot.
Right. Which in an individual case, you'd have to take it up with the
Your
code
best
enforcement
bet
officer.
is to come in and talk to code enforcement. That's the
You have
only,
to have a conforming lot.
that's the only way you'll get any kind
Well,
of an
you
answer.
know, at one point in the zoning, pre-existing, non-conforming vacant lots
He's got stiff shoulders here.
had exemptions. You know, again, I'm not here to keep up with each revision. But I can tell you 3 times, we've been zoned stricter and stricter, stricter, the last one being resource protection, which completely took our lot, so we have no chance.
Who's next?
Dr. W.L. Williams, Sunset Boulevard, Acton. The last speaker, I understand his plight, and I know there are others who have similar difficulties, having had land here for many, many decades. I don't know why it can't be worked out that they can petition because of their longevity of ownership for specific types of exemptions. What worries me is that I lived in Louisiana for 30 years in an infectious disease practice, and that state has totally ruined their wetlands, and you know what has happened to Louisiana because of that. To me, I've been told that the amount of acreage on the interior wetlands, the ones that are going to be sort of forgotten about, is almost 1,000 acres. I don't know if that's true or not, but to me, those areas provide tremendous filtration systems for both surface as well as underground water that eventually get to the lakes. Our lakes are already very, very crowded. There are many people who have very small plots of land on the lakes already. To me, it's not going to probably adversely affect our lakes immediately in the first couple of years. But in 5 or 10 years, the lakes will have deteriorated because we no longer have the protection of these inland wetlands. Not only that, but the fact that 1 acre of wetlands can absorb 300,000 gallons of rainfall, okay, at one time. So it also helps as far as temporary flood prevention and things of that sort. To me, this town has a tremendous asset in their lakes. It helps to support the town. To do anything at this point in time in the 21st century to make the rules and regulations less stringent is not wise for the long run. And I would urge that the voters vote no on both of these proposals, the one from the selectmen as well as the one from the committee, because I don't think it's in the best interest of our children, our grandchildren, or for that matter, even our generation, to see the slower deterioration of the lakes getting faster. And so I think that to forget the wetlands, especially if it's 1,000 acres that we're talking about, is very foolhardy. We can make arrangements by law or however other way you want to do it to give people like the last speaker some sort of exemption if he can prove that he's been an owner for X number of years before all of these things took place. But this is the time when water is really precious. Fracking is contaminating many water, subterranean water. We have Los Angeles running around quickly, building a $1.2 billion desalination plant because of the droughts that no longer provide good water for that part of the country. Water is being sucked out of Maine at a volume of some 160 million gallons a year from Nestle. That has to have some bad effect on the water table already. But to do anything to make it worse, I think, is short-sighted. And I would urge that we let voters know. It's very complicated, these proposals on the paper. I don't know how people can understand it if they don't come to the meeting, but I would hope that both proposals would be defeated. Thank you.
Who's next? Yes, sir.
My name is William Plant. I'm from Springvale, but I own land here in Acton, local contractor. I'm going to disagree with this guy, because it sounds like he's already got a camp, and he's probably not too affected by this. The other guy, I feel really bad for. He's got a lot, trying to do something with it. He's been paying taxes on it. This resource protection, to me, is just, it's so restrictive. You're basically stealing people's land. I don't know who was in charge of started this whole thing to start with, but my blood was boiling listening to him. And I felt bad for the guy before him. I'm struggling with trying to figure out where this 250 feet came from if you're not on a major water body, for starters. I can see it around a lake, But when you have a stream or a brook and you're setting 250 feet off a brook, you guys kidding me right now?
Or not.
That's not exactly what it is. The 250 feet is the shoreland zone from the edge of a great pond or river. The brooks are a different matter, 75 feet and maybe a little bit more with the buffer zone.
Kenny, could you pull my piece of land up on that map?
And what these proposals are trying to do are to make it easier for people who have some land in RP to allow them to build up to a 1,500 square foot structure or addition to their home, whereas now you can't. These proposals are possibly allowing you to do something with your land that you couldn't.
I bought a 100-acre parcel, and I'm gonna tell you, just about 40 acres of it is in your restrictive zone. Forty out of 100 acres is in the restrictive zone. Look at the brown. Follow that.
That's shoreland.
It's a brook. It's not a major water body at all.
What part of the town is this, Ken?
Goose Pond and West Shore.
So out of 100 acres, you guys, I call it, you guys stole 40 acres. It's high and dry. It's not like it's in a swamp or wetland, and you're not trying to build in a wetland,
Right.
but it's, I'd just love to know who started this whole, of taking land like this. It's unbelievable.
It's been going on for a long time. Not just here, everywhere.
Yeah, follow the brown. I mean, people that it's not affecting us, people, you probably yourself, you guys already own land, you already got your little house and doing what you're doing, but the people that own this land, own land, that you're telling them they can't even cut a tree on or do anything within 250 feet. So if you have a brook that runs through your land, there's a 500-foot swath right up the middle, you can't even touch. You're lucky you can walk on it.
It's only 250 feet if the brook is designated a great river or something.
Is this a
By
great
the
river?
state. That's by the state.
It's got 10 acres of wetlands on it.
It must be contiguous, yeah.
Oh, 10 acres of wetlands? Well, then the state set those guidelines. That's got enough, that's out of our hands. We can't, we're not affecting that. But all these proposals are trying to do is possibly make it easier for you to find some spot on your land where you could do something.
I'm not really complaining about finding a spot to build, I'm more or less complaining about how restricted, how much land is being taken. I could see if it was in a wet area or a low area, but when it's high and dry, and you're still telling us we can't do anything with it. But you want our tax money.
Well,
Does that mean you're gonna take 40 acres out of the middle and take 40 acres worth of taxes off my tax bill? Is that what you're telling
I
me?
don't know. You'd have to talk to the selectmen about that.
I'm just, asking some simple questions. I mean, there's probably a bunch of people
Here's
here,
your simple answer, and that's out of our hands. We don't.
and you wanna speak, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Well, I'm one of the selectmen.
Wait a second.
Perfect.
One of the reasons we brought this up was because the land that's affected by our changes is now being taxed at $350 an acre for backland, plus $45,000 for a buildable lot. And all it's worth, really taxable, is $125 an acre is what we should be taxing for. And we discovered this through people like you coming in trying to build on your land. So that's why we propose these two changes for the town to make the decision, because the selectmen cannot.
Believe me, I'm
make the
all for
decision.
you guys, the selectmen.
And that's the reason we're bringing it forward. It's just a question we wanted to ask the town, let the taxpayers decide what they want to
Well,
do.
my other problem is that you have to live in Acton to vote on this, is that correct? So I own this land, I live in Springvale, but I have no say in what is gonna be done,
Nope, sorry.
right?
SOL. And that is.
I'm just trying to get the facts
That's in
straight, so I
every town you make.
want everybody to hear this.
That's got nothing to do with Acton. That's I can't vote on something you want to do. in
Right, but I just
Springfield.
want everybody to hear this, you know what I mean? If you live out of town and you're paying taxes here, and you guys are taking our land, but we can't vote on it.
The land has already been
Still there.
taken. We're trying to give you a little bit of the use back?
He's got his hand, let's let this, I'm dying to hear what this guy has to
Well, just
say.
wait a minute. You'll be sorry if
I know I am,
let me get the rest of the audience a chance to say something. Then we'll have all kinds of time.
he's itching to say something, I'd love to hear it.
Are you pretty much
Yeah,
done? Thank you. Yes, sir,
I just
come on up.
I just want to say that I'm somewhere in between these two gentlemen. I fully support wetlands protection, but in fairness, the most restriction and the widest buffer zones should apply to new lots and new subdivisions.
Who else? Before Tom. Oh, Mr. Neal, come on up. State your name.
Got another shoreline.
My name's Dick Neal, and for those who don't know, I lived in the old farmhouse right before the school on the Milton Mills Road. And I own 11 acres there, including that 3.5 acre field, which is about 20 feet above the wetlands. And with the, I came and happened to get in a discussion with the code officer a number of months ago, and conversation kind of drifted over to my property, and next thing you know, he mapped it out, and he says, oh, your 11 acres, there's over 10 acres that is completely unbuildable. And so he did mention it to the planning board. The planning board made some changes to try to ease things for some of the people, but all the exemptions that they put in there don't apply to me. You want to limit it to a 1,500 square foot building, total. My barn alone is 40 by 60, that's 2,400 square feet. That means I can't even put a little entryway on the front of my house. I can't put a screen porch. I can't make any improvements outside the envelope of my present building. I've owned that property for 28 years now, and I'm getting along in age, and with an old farmhouse, I turn around and get into that point in life where the wife and I are looking at possibly downsizing and going into something smaller. Over the years, we thought, well, okay, we can always put a little small house out in the field. Or, if worse come to worse, we could turn around and, depending on the real estate market, we could possibly sell off a house lot out in the field. Give us a little bit of extra money for, put down towards having to purchase another piece of property. But also now I find out I can't do it. The lots have to be effective as of 2011, prior to this zoning change. While I applaud the planning board for trying to make some exceptions here to help some of the people, all I know is that it has no effect whatsoever on the planning board's recommendations. And that's why I will fully support the selectmen's recommendation and restrict the resource protection in the shoreline zone itself. It just amazes me, and I humbly disagree with my friend, Mr. Williams, for us to turn around and put so much effort in trying to preserve and have buffers around wetlands, so-called resource protections, that could be 4 or 5 miles from the lake. And then we turn around, and if I can take you around and see what is happening right within the 250 feet of the lakes themselves. It just doesn't make sense at all to me. So I have a map. This is concerns the code officer himself drew and pulled up off the computer. Here's my house right here. There's a brook that goes down through, and there's a wetland out in here. There is actually no wetland behind my house. I also have a copy of, I think it's USGS geographical map. And here, let me get my bearings here. The wetland is shown all over here. This is my house right here, and it does not show any wetland right behind my house. So I feel this map that they have paints a too broad a brush. And I've advocated, for one thing, to have in the zoning code the wording such that when we get to a situation like this, that provides the opportunity for the code officer to go out and do a site visit and see whether what is intended by the code is actually there on the ground. And these maps that are made are, I think it even mentions on some of these maps that there's errors in them. And so I'm all for the selectmen's recommendation. Thank you.
Who else?
Chip, can I go through the three articles so we know the differences?
Please, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Kenny, could you do one thing for us, please, for all of us? Would you comment on the status of the three gentlemen that we have heard preceding the present? Richard, Bill, and Mr. Weeks, and let us know whether the changes that were implemented in 2011 are actually impacting them, or actually they are being impacted by state regulations over which we have no purview. We cannot relax state regulations.
I mean, there's been a ton of misinformation being given out as they speak tonight, but we can go through this, take a look at it, and then look individually on each one. Question one was put forward by the selectmen. What that added is the definition of in-shoreland zone for 2 to 10 acres, and what that will do is, on that map up there, any of this black area, it's going to remove all these from resource protection. And when you're thinking wetland, you're picturing the ducks out there swimming, it's just poor soil. So when you're trying to find the wetland on your property and it's mapped, it could just be a hydric soil type. So the selectmen's article would remove any of these black areas here. The second proposal by the selectmen would allow through a conditional use permitting process. If you have property, all resource protection, there's no place to build, you can come through the planning board with this criteria met here, and they'll find your place to build on your property. That's all over town, you'd be able to do that, in the shoreland, out of the shoreland. Question 3 is proposed by the planning board. If you've got resource protection on your property and you're out of the shoreland zone, they would, same process, through conditional use, allow to find you a place to build on your property. The difference between the planning board and the selectmen is the planning board only focused outside of the shoreline zone. The selectmen focused all over town. All three articles will deregulate resource protection.
Ken, can you help us understand the relationship of existing and pre-existing state standards to the three gentlemen that have been talking with us this evening?
Some of the wetlands were expanded, such in Mr. Neal's case, because of the edge of the soil went from the edge of the wetland or the edge of the water to the edge of the poor soils. So some of those were expanded.
In 2011?
Correct.
But if he had had a site evaluator 2 years preceding the implementation of the 2011 regulations, would it have been a different evaluation outcome versus thereafter?
He could have a wetlands delineator now, go out there and delineate that, clean that map up a little bit, and maybe find some area. If you're trying to create another lot, that's gonna be much more restrictive than to find a place to build on your property. Now you're trying to find 2 acres for 2 lots, so 4 acres and 500 feet of road frontage you're trying to find to create a second lot. That's gonna be a lot harder than the planning board trying to find you an area that's buildable on your 10 acres or 20 acres. Did that make it a little clearer on the three articles? Because it's somewhat confusing. All three deregulate, it's just what level of deregulation. Sorry to butt in on you, Dennis.
Quick question. The selectmen's are going to the state standards, correct? And the other standards are the new standards that the planning board brought, which are are stricter than the state standards.
The selectmen's would go towards the state standards, back to the
Right,
state
and
standards.
the planning boards are more restrictive than the state standards.
Correct.
We've had those since before 2011, though. We've had those for quite a while. But they are more restrictive.
The planning board only deregulates outside of the shoreline zone, the selectmen deregulates in and out of the shoreline zone.
Dennis, and you are?
Dennis Long, I live on the Flat Ground Road along the Salmon Falls River. As most of the people on the planning board knows, I have argued against some of this resource protection before this was passed in 2011, and quite often by myself. But the last planning board meeting there, I think it was on the 16th, you weren't there, Chip, so you're left out of this one. Mr. Williams asked if, this is roughly what he asked anyway, if the planning board thought that people could make an educated decision on voting on this up here at the polls instead of on the floor at town meeting. And there was kind of a chuckle, and pretty much the answer was no. And I don't agree with that, because I have a huge amount of confidence in the voters being educated on what they voted on up here. Because if they weren't very knowledgeable about the issues, they would never have ousted me and elected Ted Kryzak. But that point aside, there is misleading information that's being put out there. The number one thing is, and you can blame it on the state or whoever you want to blame it on, is using the terminology wetland. Now we've got this wetland and forested wetland. It's, well, the truth of the matter is, if you're from Maine, wetland is the marsh and stuff like that that's around the lakes or on the rivers. And the forested wetland, we always call them swamps. And I agree with a lot of what Mr. Williams was saying tonight, but there's a perception out there that this land that's in resource protection, that it's all wetland. And as I've stated before, I own, I don't know, 50 acres, and I spoke wrong before when I said there was only a couple acres that was wetland. Because I was sitting up there today working on my house and watching the ducks and the geese out there. And I also own the marsh. And some people don't really believe that. But the town taxes me on that marsh. So apparently it's my property, because my deeds do go to the river. So so there is more wetland on my property than I had led people to believe before, because I never took in consideration the 8 or 10 acres of marsh that I have out there. But once you get off the river, that's the end of my wetland. There's no brooks, no first order, second order streams. The soils are coarse sand, it's good drainage. About every time I've asked the planning board is why is my land in resource protection, there's a different reason. Whether it's the poor soils or elevation or whatever. But the truth of the matter is, 40 acres of that is dry land. Always has been dry land. And I understand Tom's very passionate about preserving the wildlife, and it's been his cause for many years in the environment. And I've been told, or it's been implied that I talk sometimes and I'm not informed about the whole situation, or I'm uneducated to the big picture. And the planning board, and I'm glad that you guys do what you do. You donate a lot of time, and you do what you believe is right. And Chip, quite often you said that it's your job to put those things forward and let the people decide whether they want to go for it or whether they want to throw it out. And you've done that many times over the years. And sometimes the planning board gets their way, what they believe, and sometimes they don't. And that's a good thing. But what I would like to ask is, ask the planning board members especially, has any of you ever been out on the Salmon Falls River? You have? Have you ever walked the property that's along the Salmon Falls River?
A property or your property? Any property?
The property,
Yes.
the whole length of the flat ground road,
No,
or just a small,
it's a private road. I have to ask permission to go in.
that's true, Chip, and they're not very friendly down there.
I know.
And a lot of people are a little nervous about going up there, but, back about 65, 70 years ago, my grandfather bought 50 acres down there. And he had given some to his kids, and he gave a couple acres to me. And back about 20 years ago, I bought another 65 acres that was next to his 50 acres. And I've since gave some to my children. I sold a piece to Cowherd. And if you really look at what you're protecting down there, and I doubt that the people that's been down there really have seen the things in the last 60 years that I've seen. There's a big cranberry bog out there. There's some wild rice that was planted back in the 50s by a gentleman out of Milton Mills. And there's quite a bit of wild rice out there. And I see the osprey all the time. They get a nest out there. The bald eagles they're there all the time. They nest down there. The marsh hens, the kingfishers, the geese, the ducks. And quite often in the summer when we go out on the river to go fishing or whatever, me and my kids, they're not kids anymore, but even my grandchildren now, I guess, we pick up the rubbish in the water that comes down from the lakes, the soda bottles and the beer cans and the milk jugs, and watch the phosphorus come down through, and it really is a very place that really should be protected. And I think that with all the wildlife and the environment down there, that my family, which owns from Heath Brook down to the Oxbow. And for those of you who've been on the Santa Falls River, you would know where the Oxbow is. It's about a mile. And I think we've been very good stewards of that environment down there. And it's been said that I can have, Kenny just mentioned it, that Mr. Neal could do this, have a wetlands delineator come down and do some soil tests on my property. Well, I think that price for a test now is up around $300. So how many places do you have to do it? You know, say 40 acres, you gotta do one test per acre. Geez, that's about $12,000 to show that I'm right. And it's good drainage down there, it's good soils, the fauna down there isn't any different than it is up the top of Goat Farm Orchard. It's the same trees, the same ferns, the same, and it's really too bad. And then there was another comment that's been made about the selectmen's proposal over the taxes. And it's been said that they haven't been able to find any abatements on any property because people couldn't build on the property, so the initial house lot valuation. Well, in February 24th, 2012, I got one. And I've got it right here. It was for a house lot. And if things don't change, I'm not sure how it's going to go, but I am going to come back and file for another abatement because my property is still up there around $100,000 valuation from the town. And I think that if I can't sell it, who the heck's gonna buy it? You can't do nothing with it. So it can't be worth what the town's got it valued at. And I would encourage all the people that have lost their rights to use their property for what they intended it for, to file for abatements from the town and get it's not a perfect situation, but at least you're not paying the same as everybody else for property that you can't use. And I was thinking about you, Art, with the orchard. If the town decided to regulate your property over there, and they're not gonna say you can't grow your fruit, they're not saying you can't spend the money to raise your fruit, take care of it. But if they pass a regulation, because this is where you're gonna make your money, that you can't harvest your fruit. I remember when you come to town, and I remember you paid a pretty good penny to be in that business. And essentially, it's the same thing with these people that own this land. You know, I've heard different members of the planning board say that they've worked many, many hours on some of these ordinances. And that's true, and I applaud their efforts. Myself personally, I've spent many hours on committees, volunteering my time for the community in the last 40 years. But you know, somebody like me and anybody else, we also have an awful lot of hours invested in earning the money to buy this property. And I just think it's very misleading to call, regardless of what the state says it is, there are a lot of property out there that in all actuality is not wet, but it's being encompassed for whatever reason, and being led to believe that it's all wetland. It's either got a brook or a stream or whatever, and I think it's wrong. And I would encourage the voters to support the selectmen's recommendation on putting this changing this zoning back to where it was prior to 2011. And I would encourage the planning board to come up with a more logical zoning ordinance that is reality with the property. And on that, I'm going to keep it short and sit down. Thank you.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yes.
The choices aren't so stark. This is fine tuning. You've got maybe a little revenue problem, a little fairness problem. And I don't want it said, and I don't want voters to think that you're deregulating. There's plenty of regulations left right here, having to do with when the lot was created. There's a buffer zone here, there's a limitation on square footage. You're not totally deregulating anything. You're rolling it back a little bit.
Right, and we never said we were deregulating at all. We said we're trying to make it easier for some sections of town, for some people.
Well, we said, removing restrictions or removing regulation.
Well, the selectmen are removing more restrictions than the planning board, so they are removing, yes. And you are again?
Ron Valancourt. I'm in a similar situation with Mr. Weeks, except I just bought my property 2 years ago. I bought 13.9 acres on Goose Pond, Lot 14. I went down to get a building permit a few weeks ago to put a lean-to on the back of my barn. Now, when I bought the place, I looked at it and it was rural zoning. I didn't even know anything about wetland protection. So when I went to get the permit, I find out because I've got this brook that runs this time of the year till maybe July, that's maybe a foot wide, but in a couple of places it pools up. But it dries up by the end of the summer. I've got 13.9 acres and I can't even put a deck on my house because of the way the zoning is now. I just want, for those of us in that situation, I think the state made a big mistake putting some of these places in, and I think the selectmen's recommendation is a good way to turn that back around. I mean, I can understand if you've got a swamp or a marsh in your backyard that's covering acres, but I mean, some of us just don't have those circumstances, and I can't do nothing with my property as it is now. So I want to support the selectmen's plan.
All right, our plan would also allow some building on some RP land too. The selectmen's allows more, ours does allow some too. We are easing it up a little as well. Who's next?
If I may,
Yes.
I just want to touch on the issue of assessing.
Oh, where do you get up here?
Tell
We
a
can't
little
hear
story.
you good.
Okay.
Well, make it a short story. And you are
It's going to be a short story. Tom Gore, or Robert T. Gore, excuse me, better known as Tom.
the pen.
Can't talk as long as I did, Tom.
No, I
We
have
got
no
time limits
intention,
now.
and I can't compete with your humor either. And I won't even try. Several years ago, back in, 2003, I think it was, actually, when I was chairman of the board and also chairman of the Board of Assessors, we had a case arise on Wilson Lake, which is now, we're talking shoreland zone here. An applicant came to us for an abatement, specifically because his lot, he discovered, had become non-buildable. Mr. Nass, at that point in time, was chairman of the Board of Assessing Review, or what do we call it? I don't remember, but, okay, Board of Assessing Review. So, we looked at it, and actually, the lot had become non-buildable, so we started going through the records of sales of land around the lake within the 2 or 3 years prior to this event. And what did we discover, to our utter amazement, was that these lots not only had retained the value of buildable lots, but in some cases had actually gone higher, okay? And the reason was because people who owned land abutting these lots really wanted that piece of land, and they wanted to prevent other people from building on them. So in fact, what was happening was, and we had like 5 cases on Wilson Lake in just this short period of time, where neighbors were competing to buy these non-buildable lots at astronomical prices. So I guess my point is, don't assume that the land has lost value because you can't build on it. At least in the shoreland zone, that appeared to be the case on Wilson Lake back in 2003, 2004, okay? And that's all I have to say on it. Thank you.
Good job, Tom.
Anyone else? Tom? Oh, wait, we've got another person, and then Tom. And you are?
My name's Linda Greco. I just want to voice my opinion that a lot of the people speaking tonight have been bringing up personal issues, and I just want to remind everyone that if we change the rules, that goes into effect for everybody. So if you want to make it so you can build on your lot and you protect less land, then it has other implications. I'd like to say that I think using the land is not only being able to build on it. There's a lot of value to these other pieces. Like Tom Gore just said, your land still has value even if it's not built on. I believe that every lot doesn't need a building, and given the amount of tiny little lots around all the lakes that we've spoken about, I think that just makes it more important to protect the areas that are now in resource protection. Just because the state lowers their standards does not mean our town needs to. If we already have these things in place, then I think that's a plus, and some people will value that and, you know, look to Acton as an example. And the values of everyone's land will go down if our lakes turn green. People won't want to come here, won't want to come to their camps and have this be their vacation town. So protect your right and the future's right to clean water, and vote no to all of these proposals. Thank you.
Anyone else? Tom? Oh, Carl. Carl, come on up.
Carl Davis. I was on still I'm on the board of York County Soil and Water, and I think it was probably 5 years ago that Mawson Lake was on a kind of endangered list because of water quality. York County Soil and Water worked very hard to get that off that list, did get it off the list, and I would encourage all of you to think hard about our water resources. It takes a long time to change them once you've brought in difficult situations. It's a lot of work.
Anyone else? Tom?
My name is Tom Cashin. I've been on the planning board too long. I don't know where to start. Kenny, I wish you could give us a hand and just embrace the 4 gentlemen, Mr. Weeks, Mr. Valencourt, Mr. Long, and Mr. Plant, Bill. And let us know whether or not actually, and Mr. Neal, excuse me. Leave Mr. Neal out. Whether they are indeed, when you had mentioned earlier that the hydric soil delineation may have been refined, I think in those 5 cases or 4 cases, all of those instances are actually examples of state regulations, not town regulations that were adopted in 2011. I don't think several years prior to the inception of this new safeguards around the smaller wetlands that these gentlemen would have been in any different situation than they find themselves now. A number of folks, when this discussion started, I was able to download a bit of information by the Natural Resources Council of Maine. Some folks read it, hopefully, and it delineates and kind of puts in context the struggle we're having in Acton now with the notion of protecting our wetlands. Linda made a good point, Linda Greco, when she said that the landscape of Acton is for all of us. When we zone, we're not zoning for Richard or Bill or Dennis, or who's the other guy, or Mr. Weeks. We're zoning, hopefully, with the good sense for the present and the future, so that the resources that we care about will be here. Dennis spoke very well about seeing all this wildlife from his porch or somewhere, I don't know where it was. But,
Top of the pine tree, Tom.
and at the same time, not to pick on you, Dennis, but you gave this to me. You're talking about some kind of development down in there. I just wonder whether, and by the way, well, I'll continue here. I just wonder whether you're going to see all that wildlife, or your grandchildren will see that wildlife, if you obtain the level of development that you wish for. The bounty of wildlife that we see in this town is because we've respected boundaries, and we've maintained through good luck and good fortune and the good thinking of our forebears, the wildlife corridors that connect these little wetlands that are now going to be infringed upon if the selectmen's proposal carries today. They won't be as viable as wetland corridors, and wildlife corridors, excuse me. And I think wildlife is something that hasn't been mentioned too much tonight, except by the opponents, I guess. But I think it's important to realize the conditions that need to be in place for that to flourish. One of the definitions, again, taking up from Dennis's discussion, that is a state definition of resource protection, is, if I may read briefly, Chip, all land areas within 250-foot horizontal distance from the upland edge of wetlands and wetlands associated with great ponds and rivers, which are rated moderate and high-value waterfowl and wading bird habitat, including nesting and feeding areas by the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. Salmon Falls River, I think you and I are aware that that's an important area that fits in this definition. It's been recognized and mapped as such for many years. We need to save what we have, and in order to do that, we have to respect one another. We don't just throw these regulations out there willy-nilly. There's a lot of thought that goes into formulating these things, and we try to give as much public information and have as many public hearings as are warranted to try to explain what we're doing. I think it's important on the abatement assessment issue. This is being cast, this notion that is in front of us is being cast as a tax, as an economic problem, when in fact it's a problem not so much of assessment, but of understanding the resources that are in front of us and how best to balance our growth with the landscape that we all love and want to perpetuate. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Dennis?
I want to clarify, first off, I have no intentions of putting a development in on my property. I plan on leaving it just like it is. So I want to make that very clear. I've got no interest in a development at all. And second of all, it was alluded that the things that were done in 2011 didn't affect my property that was already in resource protection. Well, if you look at the map that's over here behind me, my understanding is the stuff that's marked in black is the stuff that would be taken out that the town put in. And if you look at my property, right in the middle of it, there's a black square. So I am right when I say that my property wasn't all in resource protection before 2011. And there's a little about the legacy that we're leaving our children. My boys especially are very big environmentalists. And I've always, I brought them up that way. I respect the property. I respect the waterways. There's 5 tributaries to the Salmon Falls River. And like I said, I understand the wildlife thing. But you know, in the 70 years that my family has owned property down there, I can promise you that we have done nothing to hurt the environment to this wildlife. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there. The town of Acton does more damage to the wildlife in our waters and in our places that should be protected than all the taxpayers in town. I've got tamaracks down there that's been there for 50 years out there in the marsh that are dying. You got trees up and down the roads are all dying. You got a well right out here they had to replace because it's full of salt. And what are they talking about? Doing away with the sand, put more salt on the roads. Well, that doesn't make no sense to me. The town of Acton can take and they can assist people on private roads financially to protect the lakes from the runoff. They choose not to because it's private roads and you can't spend money on private entities. Well, you know, thanks to people like Mr. Nass, when he was up in Augusta, we can. So, and this is what I was talking about earlier about the misleading information. All of my property was not in resource protection. My property is. You can look at the maps that the federal government did, and you'll see that my property is coarse sand. It's good drainage. The land that I've given to my children, when I had soil tests done for the septic systems, didn't have to build nothing up above the ground. It was all level. Well, that must mean there's good drainage on that property. I paid good money to have those soil tests done. So I do know what I'm talking about. And I do believe, maybe not to the extreme that Tom does, I do believe in protecting the environment. And I don't like the innuendos that I don't, because I do. Thank you.
I think we've tried to stay pretty much innuendo-free tonight.
We tried.
I thought we've,
I
for
did
the most
pretty good the
part,
first time.
we've been pretty good, I think, so. Mr. Neal?
Just a couple of quick comments. I'd like to make it clear, too, that I, too, am in favor of conservation and protecting our lakes. All I'm turning around and asking you to look at a little bit more moderate. As I say, in the fields that I have, I would have no problem if you turn around and the regulations turn around and said that I couldn't put a septic system within so many feet of the wetland. But to turn around and say that the whole property is unbuildable doesn't make sense. To say that putting a 3-foot canopy over the front door of my house is going to turn around and have an impact on Mousom Lake. It's absolutely ridiculous. You got to use a little common sense here. So as I say, it isn't that I don't want any restrictions whatsoever. I want to protect the wetlands as much as the next person. But there's a limit to how far you go. Thank you.
That's what we're trying to do with these proposals. Some are just, we're all trying to deal with a little bit of common sense, but some of the proposals are a little more common than others, that's all. And you get to decide which one you like the best.
Which side are you on?
I don't pick a side. I'm chairman, I don't have to vote.
Unless the voters decide. Hopefully on the last one. I also wanted to say that it's not, these revisions don't apply to everyone, everywhere. There's plenty of restrictions and conditions left in place. One board member just said that he believes zoning is for the present and the future. And these revisions only slightly roll back the restrictions for those of us from the past with lots prior to 2011. Thanks.
Say one more thing.
Sure.
Just for listening to everybody up here tonight, whether it's so restrictive into what's not on the board or out front to vote on, is maybe instead of having a 250-foot zone, if it was cut back to a 150-foot zone, you're still getting your resource protection, and you're probably opening up the door for a lot of these people to squeeze something in on their land where it's not in a wetland. I think everybody missed the boat. Instead of trying to just eliminate this and eliminate that, if they just took the whole resource protection zone and just shrunk it a little bit. Just a thought that it's not, I know it's not an option, but it would help, I think it would help a lot of people out that have problems here tonight. Just saying.
The state set some of these limits and we can't do anything with them, like the 250-foot shoreland zone is set by the state. We can't shrink that.
Great Lakes and Waters, I see the 250, no problem there, but when you're out in the woods, if that went from 250 down to 150, 90% of the people that have a problem with you guys wouldn't even be here tonight.
Well, then, there's a proposal being
But it's
proposed.
not a proposal, you know what I mean? And the worst thing is, if you gotta live in the town to even vote on it, so you're eliminating everybody that's got a problem.
I know. The world's just against you tonight.
It's just crazy, man.
You poor fella.
Don't cry for me, but it's crazy.
I understand. Yes, sir.
I just want to add one more thing, and that is, I agreed with the one person who agreed with me, namely that you should not make a rule when you have exceptions that you're going to try to mitigate. And I don't know why we have these things up here on a ballot when I think the committee or the selectmen should have worked out something else in terms of having definitions in the non-lake areas, rather than eliminating the wetlands, have it redefined in some way, or have a mechanism for exceptions for people who've held the land since 1930, or for people who have held the land for 28 years and can't even put a little roof over their front door. That could have been done rather than eliminate or propose to eliminate all the wetlands that are not around the lakes. And I think it was a bad decision. And that's why I would hope the voters would say no to it and bring it back for perhaps a better job of making true restrictions that are meaningful and have exceptions to the rule for people who obviously have a gripe. Thank you.
I think you hit the nail right on the head with that. Absolutely. Eliminating certain things isn't gonna cure anything.
Anybody else? Tom?
This time I'm not a member of the planning board. When I go to the polls on June 9th to vote on this question, I've been conflicted as to whether to support the planning board's recommendation, which came initially and was followed by the counter-proposal of the Board of Selectmen. No, sir. Ours was proposed in January, yours was in March, if I read the order correctly. I would, I think I'm going to opt for voting no on all three proposals because I think maybe it's evident that more work needs to be done if indeed we can devise some way to have some exceptions to the rule. I'm kind of doubtful that you can devise an ordinance like that. We'd run into the situation before where we try to limit things for a gentleman who is trying to develop a subdivision or something versus a homeowner, and that's illegal. You can't do that. That's discrimination. So I think that's going to be a tough problem to solve, but I think maybe we can take an attempt at it. But I don't think we should throw out the notion of taking care of our landscape because there's some assessing or zoning issues here. And I see this, quite frankly, as an assessing problem maybe that is driving a zoning issue, and I don't think that's the right way to govern a town. You put your zoning in, you give a lot of thought to how you're going to protect different areas of the town, allow for growth in some areas. The outlying areas, which we've done pretty well, I thought, are protected because of larger lot sizes, and we're discouraging another fire station in the other end of town, you know, by trying to consolidate growth around the core. And when you tinker with things that have taken a lot of thought, not only by the participants in the development of the proposals, but also the townspeople in considering them at successive meetings, et cetera, zoning changes should not be taken lightly. The notion of relaxing the safeguards that are presently in place in these large wetlands that are directly contiguous with our great pond.
They can't hear you on the TV if you don't talk in the mic.
The selectmen's proposal is going to lower the safeguards around the larger wetlands that are directly adjacent to our great ponds. Our great ponds, as Dr. Williams stated earlier, already are maxed out. They have a carrying capacity which has been exceeded. We're seeing that yearly when we have to devote more monies and contributions to our lake associations for fixing up Lake Shore Drive, and you know there is the good thing that you mentioned, Dennis, the notion of the lake associations. The town is working now with some of these private roads that have lake associations, as you know, to improve the roads and improve the runoff. So we're doing a pretty good job, but I don't think we're keeping pace with the amount of erosion that we're getting from our roads and the residences around the lake. And to open up the wetlands proximate to our great ponds to more development, more roofs, more driveways, I don't think is a sound way to go. We're dependent, 75% of our tax revenue is derived from properties in the shoreline zone. And to endanger that water quality is to endanger that physical basis of our economy. Thank you.
Can we be a little bit informal here? And I just,
They probably can't pick up your voice, so you'll have to come up to the podium, please.
just, please remember, it only applies to subdivisions after 2011. So we're not throwing, you know, we're not throwing wetlands open to danger. this revision only applies
Hi, Ron Valancourt again. Is there a method of appealing? Like, say I were to put in, I'm in one of these areas and I were to put in for a permit to put a deck on my house and it gets approved. Is there an appeal process in the town for this type of situation? Because see, I'm not trying to do a subdivision, I'm not trying to build another house. I want to put a lean-to on the back of my barn so I can get my horses out of the barn onto a dirt floor. So I'm losing all of my property, not being able to do anything. Is there an appeal process?
There's a Board of Appeals. Not every time you get turned down from code enforcement is something that you can appeal to the Board of Appeals. Go to code enforcement, tell him what you want to do. If he says no, ask him if you can go to the Board of Appeals. And if you fall within the criteria, and you have to, then you can go to them, but you've got to prove your point. It's a tough situation. If that doesn't work, if you can't go to the Board of Appeals, you can always take the town to court.
Yeah. See, and I think just having that type of common sense, if people know that they can do that. I mean, I like hunting and fishing and all that stuff. I don't want to see the wetlands go away and lakes get polluted or any of that stuff. We've got too many things working against them anyways with pesticides from apple orchards. But, you know, for those of us who aren't looking to subdivide, who just want to do a simple addition onto what we own, there needs to be a means for us to do that.
But these proposals
In
are
most
doing-
cases, there is.
Okay, so,
But go to code enforcement, he's got all the answers.
Williams again. That's the sort of thing that we ought to be voting on as a town, are the mechanisms for appeal and perhaps guidelines that the enforcer can utilize without even having to go to a board of appeals, that decisions can be made further down the line. That's the kind of legislation which I think is right. Again, to get rid of and say that we don't have any wetlands that are not adjacent to the Great Lakes is really dangerous. And again, I say, if you only could see what happened in Louisiana, because they paid no attention to anything. And not only did Katrina blow them away because there were no more wetlands left, but they lose 3 stadium-sized pieces of land every year on the coast because they've taken all of the wetlands out.
Anyone else? Were you gonna get up, Bill?
I don't think you want to listen.
Hey, this is, well, if it's short and sweet, sure.
First of all, I live on Milton Mills Road. I can't speak about any other than Dick Neal's property. And my understanding is that he was turned down because the new soils map said his property wouldn't support a house. Is that correct?
He's never applied for anything. He hasn't been turned down for anything.
Well, he had a conversation with you, didn't he?
He's had several conversations with us. 3, 4, 5 times a week.
My point is, he has 2 different federal maps. They don't match. And my understanding is that these soils maps you received from Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission, and they got them from the federal government. And anywhere up and down the entire coast of Maine where the town has introduced a federal map, they've ended up in an argument because somebody in Washington has no idea what's up here. And there has to be some way for people to be able to make use of land that they have paid for and owned for years. And the first place to start is to look at all these soil maps, and then I'll go out and look at the soil. There is absolutely no reason why he shouldn't be allowed to split his 11 acres and build a house. But you have created a situation. There's already a house next door to him that's much closer to the swamp than any of his land. And the answer was, well, they did it before 2011. You let them do it then. Now suddenly, because somebody gave you these maps, and you think they're the gospel truth? Well, go talk to Kennebunk and York and all these other places where they got the maps, and they took the federal government. I don't think they took them into the court system, but they made them come out and take a look. And suddenly, oh, it's wrong.
He's talking about the flood maps.
That's the feds.
Those are flood maps that they're fighting out for.
Anyone else? Mr. Neal, you getting up?
Seeing you have the, my property up there, and you look at that band of green, could I ask, is that supposed to be the 250 feet?
25, I think.
Because all I'm telling you is it's wrong. And this is what I'm trying to get across to you, that you can't make decisions just based on that map. Now, I personally went down a couple of days ago with a tape measure, and I measured from the, just one spot there on the corner of the field, from the edge of the wetland, and I went back 250 feet, and I ended up about in the middle of the field, not out to the road. And my, basic feeling is that, yeah, in order to protect that wetlands, if you've got a reasonable setback, if you turn around and say, in order to build a house in that field, the septic system can not be any closer than 100 feet or 150 feet of the wetland, that would make sense. But to turn around and say the whole property is unbuildable, and that I can't, sell a house lot on it, and then on top of that, tell me that my existing building, which there is no wetland behind the building, but the green band goes right through there. And so I'm just saying the maps are wrong, and this is why I've advocated to have the wording in the ordinance such that if we get into a situation like this, then somebody with a little common sense can go out and look at it and says, by God, you're right, there's no wetlands there, even though the map shows it. Why are we making decisions based on a map that is wrong? It just isn't right, it doesn't make sense.
Thank you.
Any rebuttal?
Oh, heavens no. Uh-oh.
I'll keep it to Jim. I think excuse me. Again, it's Tom Gore. I think the unfortunate part of this discussion tonight is that we are faced with something that has been plopped down before us without a lot of thought as to the implications of it. It's kind of a this way or that way, and it doesn't start at the right place. To start at the right place is say, why do we have these ordinances? Okay? And is there another way that objective, once you decide on what that objective is there another way we can achieve it and accommodate, okay, some of these people who have issues here? But that's not what we have here. My suggestion would be that the town meeting elect a committee of 5 people, spend a year looking at this, have discussion back and forth, okay, and find an accommodation or the route forward. But placing articles before this, which are one side or the other, without any discussion from the proposers, in this case, the selectmen as proposers, okay, who I think are, they have an interest that they're advocating for, and that's fine, but they need to be able to answer and present information concerning why the ordinance is there and how their modifications do not significantly impact the ordinance. In other words, what I'm saying is, obviously these ordinances were created to preserve something. Okay? Can we accomplish this objective and still preserve something? But that's not where we are, because there has been no discussion from them about how we do preserve. Am I making myself clear? We need an accommodation, okay? And the best way to get that accommodation is for the town meeting to elect a committee, discuss it for a year, and come back to the town meeting.
Tom and I could be on that.
But that's not where we're at. So, thank you, Chip.
Pleasure. Who's up? Who's next? We about ready to call it a Thursday?
Unless somebody wants me to talk again.
Let's call it a Thursday.
No?
Anybody else? Well, I didn't say you couldn't. Anybody with anybody on the board want to throw in your 2 cents? This is gonna be last call for anybody's comments. Anybody's. Come on.
Everyone else went again, I might as well. So I'd just like to point out to the voters and to everyone that I think it's sort of interesting that 2 of these questions were proposed by the Board of Selectmen, which are 3 people, and they didn't, I don't believe, went through any sort of petition or informing the public why or what they are proposing. I understand the planning board put in a lot of time to their proposal, not that I'm going to vote for it, but I think the voters, and since everyone will be voting on these behind the curtain, they're not going to have necessarily seen this before unless they're here tonight. I think, as a suggestion, it would be helpful if there was some sort of explanation that they got along with these questions, so that you go into the box, you read especially question 1, which is very unclear what it's actually doing, because Resource Protection District just becomes nullified. So I think the voters deserve some sort of explanation, and that's about it. Thank
There
you.
are lots of rules involved with referendum elections and what can be on a ballot, what can be brought into the ballot booth, and that's all handled by the clerk, and she's gone. So you can ask her what types of materials may be brought in, but I think it's kind of slim pickings. You get the ballot, you get the questions, and there's not always a lot of room for explanations. But there again, I'm not a clerk, so I don't know for sure.
So the bulk of the people that will be voting on this don't really even have a clue what they're voting on.
Well, see, now this is the wonder of cable television. Because we're all on TV tonight.
At 1 o'clock in the morning.
No, they run, and also you can do this on the town website. If you don't have cable, you can go to the town website, click, go to frickin' YouTube, and every meeting we've ever had is on YouTube.
But the people that are not affected don't even care.
Well, if they live in town and they pay taxes in town, pay taxes in town, then they should care. One way or the other, they should care. And, if they don't, they don't. But, hopefully the people that come out will have been able to figure out what it is that they want to do. We've had this meeting. This will be on the website. This will be on TV until June 9th, I guess. And there's literature in the clerk's office and in the code office on this stuff. If people who aren't here can pick that information up there. The planning board meets the first and third Thursdays of every month. if somebody has a question about this, they can certainly come in and talk to us at one of our regularly scheduled meetings about it. The selectmen meet they meet all the time. Every Thursday, I know, until 7 o'clock in the afternoon, so they can come in and talk to the selectmen. So, or they can talk to Tom. He's always available via phone. So, it's, if you want to be informed, you certainly can be. If you don't, that's your prerogative. Because
Some of the people that are affected can't vote.
well, that's life in the bigs, I'm sorry. I don't know what to tell you. It's just the way it is. I understand. Yes, sir.
After these 2 hours, it seems to me that there is even a basis for consensus, that perhaps the whole approach to this could have been done in a better way. What can we do now that there's an election coming, in terms of we don't have all the options available to the public that probably should be, namely to allow the selectmen to keep the present ordinance, but to develop some sort of a way of exceptions and to streamline the Board of Appeal process for those people like we've heard from this evening. Is there any way to be able to do that, or delay the implementation of the law, if it's passed by the voters, until a committee could be set up by the selectmen to look at other options on this? I would just hate to see our wetlands go, even though it's a small amount, it's 1,000 acres. Thank you.
If you like the status quo, then you would vote no on everything. If you want to see some of the restrictions eased up, there's a couple of different ways to do that. As far as, if it's a big enough issue, if there's enough people that are concerned about not having good enough options, come speak to the selectmen about it, come to a planning board meeting. Maybe something will transpire from that, I don't know. But unless people come to us, we don't really know how they feel about things, or where their thoughts and interests lie. Us or the selectmen, or code enforcement. He loves to talk to people. He's always talking to people. Anybody else? Thanks for coming, everybody. It's been a lovely evening, and good night, Cable Land. Thank you.